Imagine standing in the glow of Vancouver's Winter Light Festival, snow stinging your face like 1,000 tiny knives, clutching a gift you poured your heart into, every penny scraped from late-night shifts, every hope stitched into its wrapping. It's his birthday, the man who promised to be my dad. But then, with the crowd watching, hot cider steaming, he turns, his eyes cold as a Fraser River freeze, and spits out words that shred my soul. She's not my daughter. Just some kid we took in. The silence is deafening, heavier than the Whistler snow. My heart cracks, raw, bleeding, like it's been ripped open and left to freeze. I'm not family. I'm nothing. The rage chokes me, burns hotter than the festival lights. I want to scream, but I stand taller. I'm Emily Chin. I'm 27 years old. And this is the moment I swore I'd never be invisible again. The sting of that night in Vancouver's Winter Light Festival still burns, but let me take you back to when I was just a kid, before the Taylors, before I ever dreamed of being called someone's daughter. I was 5, maybe 6, shuffled between foster homes in Surrey and Burnaby, each one colder than the last. The houses smelled of bleach and broken promises, mattresses sagging under the weight of too many kids' tears. I'd lie awake in a creaky bunk bed, 2 meters from a window that rattled in the British Columbia rain, clutching a worn-out stuffed moose, wondering if anyone would ever stay. "You're just passing through," one foster mom said, her voice flat as she handed me a garbage bag for my clothes. Another home, another stranger. I stopped asking their names after the 3rd move. My heart hardened, a tiny fist clenched against hope. At a group home in Burnaby, a social worker once looked at me, her clipboard heavier than her pity, and said, "You're a tough one, kid. Keep it up." Tough? I wasn't tough. I was invisible, a ghost in pigtails, hauling a 10-kilogram bag of belongings down Fraser Street to the next nowhere. I'd sit on the curb, watching families in minivans head to hockey practice, their laughter slicing through me like a skate on ice. I didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because tears never changed a thing. By the time I was 7, I'd been in 5 homes, each one a reminder: don't trust, don't hope, don't beg. The last home, a cramped duplex in Surrey, had a foster dad who smoked cigars on the porch, his eyes skipping over me like I was furniture. "Don't get comfy," he muttered once, tossing me a $2 coin for bus fare. I held it so tight it left a mark on my palm. That's when I learned to survive on silence, to carry my life in a bag, to expect nothing but the next goodbye. I'm Emily Chin, and this was my world before the Taylors thought they could fix me. The pain of that winter night in Vancouver, when Robert Taylor's words sliced through me like a skate on False Creek ice, still lingers, but let's rewind to when I was 7, when hope felt like something I could touch. I was still that ghost of a girl, hauling my life in a garbage bag through Surrey's rain-soaked streets, when Robert and Margaret Taylor walked into the Burnaby group home. Margaret's perfume carried the warm scent of Earl Grey tea, her smile soft like the wool scarf she knitted. Robert, a retired Navy man, stood tall with a handshake that could crush a hockey puck, his eyes steady like he'd navigated storms off the Pacific coast. "You're coming with us," Margaret said, her voice gentle but sure, kneeling to my level. "We've got a room ready for you in Vancouver." My heart, that tiny clenched fist, dared to unclench. I didn't know what adoption meant, but I knew the 10-kilometer drive to their Kitsilano home felt like crossing into a new world. Their house wasn't big, maybe 150 square meters, but it was alive. Walls painted the color of a Tofino sunset, a fridge humming with leftovers, and a backyard with a cedar swing set that didn't creak like the foster home bunks. My room had a bed with a quilt stitched with red maple leaves, not a trace of bleach in the air. For the first time, I didn't sleep with one eye open. Margaret braided my hair each morning, her fingers quick and careful, humming a tune from some old CBC radio show. "You look like a proper Canadian kid now," she'd say, tying the ends with a ribbon. Robert took me to Robson Square on weekends, lacing up my skates with the patience of a man who'd tied 1,000 knots at sea. "Push hard, kid," he'd call, steadying me as I wobbled across the ice. "You're tougher than a Canucks defenseman." I laughed, my breath fogging in the crisp air, believing I was finally home. Sunday mornings were my favorite. Margaret would whip up waffles, the kitchen filling with the sweet smell of maple syrup straight from a Quebec farm. Robert poured coffee so bad it tasted like burnt driftwood, but I sipped it anyway, sitting at their oak table, feeling like I belonged. "Tell me about school," Margaret would say, sliding me an extra waffle. I'd ramble about my math quiz or the orchid drawing I'd pinned to the classroom board, and she'd listen, really listen, her eyes bright like Granville Island's market lights. Once, I dropped my fork mid-bite, syrup splattering my shirt. Robert just chuckled, handing me a napkin. "Messes are part of the deal, kid." No yelling, no cold stares, just warmth, like the sun breaking through a Vancouver fog. I let my guard down, something I hadn't done since I was a toddler clutching that stuffed moose in Surrey. We'd drive out to Stanley Park sometimes, just the three of us, walking the seawall with Tim Hortons cup steaming in our hands. Robert would point at the totem poles, telling stories about Haida legends he'd learned from a Navy buddy. "This one's about family," he said once, his voice low, like he meant it for me. I nodded, my chest tight with something I couldn't name, hope, maybe, or the belief that I was finally someone's daughter. Margaret bought me a $10 sketchbook from a Kitsilano art shop, saying, "Draw what you see, Emily. You've got a sharp eye." I filled it with sketches of the Lions Gate Bridge, of gulls diving over English Bay, of their faces smiling at me. For those first months, I wasn't a foster kid anymore. I was Emily, their Emily, part of a family that felt as solid as the North Shore Mountains. But even then, there were cracks, tiny warnings I was too young to see. Margaret's smile faltered when I called her Mom, in front of her book club friends. "Oh, she's our little helper," she'd say, her voice tight, like she was correcting a mistake. Robert's stories stopped when his Navy buddies visited. He'd call me the kid instead of his daughter. I brushed it off, told myself I was reading too much into it. I was 7, desperate for a home, clinging to every warm moment like a life raft. I didn't know those cracks would split wide open, that the family I thought was mine would soon treat me like a stranger in their own house. I'm Emily Chen, and back then, I believed love could be enough. The memory of those early days in Kitsilano, with Margaret's warm Earl Grey scent and Robert's steady hand on my skates, feels like a cruel mirage now, especially after that night at the Winter Light Festival when Robert's words cut me to the bone. But the cracks in that dream started long before, when I was 9, and the Taylor house began to shift under my feet. It was a spring morning, the kind where cherry blossoms blanket Vancouver streets like pink snow, when Margaret sat me down at the oak table. Her hands fidgeted, not with the usual braid-tying ease but with something heavier. "We're having a baby," she said, her voice bright but brittle, like a Granville Island glass ornament about to shatter. "Twins, actually. A miracle at 40. I forced a smile, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and dread. I didn't know then that Ethan and Sophie Taylor would rewrite my place in this family. At first, I threw myself into the idea of being a big sister. I folded tiny onesies in their nursery, 10 square meters of pastel walls in the Kitsilano house, picking out stuffed beavers for Ethan and a plush orca for Sophie. "They'll love these," I told Margaret, holding up the toys, hoping for her old smile. She nodded, distracted, already orbiting the twins before they were born. "Sure, they're cute," she mumbled, her eyes on a baby monitor catalog. The change crept in slowly, like fog rolling off English Bay. My morning braids stopped. Margaret said she was too tired. Sunday waffles gave way to store-bought muffins, tossed on the counter without a word. Robert's trips to Robson Square ended. He was too busy assembling cribs. I told myself it was temporary. Babies take work, right? But the shift wasn't just in their schedules. It was in their voices, their eyes, the way they stopped seeing me. When Ethan and Sophie arrived, the house felt like it shrank overnight. Their cries filled every corner, drowning out the quiet mornings I'd loved. I tried to help, carrying Ethan carefully while Margaret cooked. But one evening, as I rocked him gently, his tiny fist grabbing my finger, Margaret spun around from the stove. "Put him down, Emily," she snapped, her voice sharp as a Stanley Park wind. "Don't hold him like that." "Like what?" "Like I belonged?" I froze, my throat tight, and handed him over. She clutched him like I'd been a threat, her eyes cold as a January tide. Robert, flipping through a Canucks game on TV, didn't look up. "Babies are fragile," he muttered, as if I'd meant harm. I stood there, 1.5 meters from the kitchen counter, feeling like I'd been slapped. That was the first time I realized I wasn't their daughter anymore, just a guest who'd overstayed. The little things I'd clung to vanished. My sketches of the Lion's Gate Bridge, once pinned proudly on the fridge, were replaced by Sophie's clumsy crayon scribbles. "Look at her talent," Margaret cooed to a neighbor, pointing at a smudged drawing, while my latest A+ math quiz sat ignored under a cereal box. Robert stopped calling me kid in that warm, Navy man way. Instead, it was Emily, grab the diaper bag, or Emily, keep it down. I was 9, still desperate to belong, so I tried harder. I cleaned the twins' bottles, folded their blankets, even saved my $5 allowance to buy Ethan a tiny Canucks cap. "Thought he'd look cute in it," I said, handing it to Robert. He glanced at it, then tossed it on the couch. "Yeah, maybe," he said, already turning back to Sophie's rattle. My heart sank, heavy as a Stanley Park cedar. The final blow came at a neighborhood barbecue in Point Grey, 3 kilometers from home. Margaret introduced Ethan and Sophie to her friends, her voice glowing, "Our twins, our miracles." Then she gestured to me, trailing behind with a plate of burnt hot dogs. "And this is Emily, our helper." Helper. The word landed like a puck to the chest, stealing my breath. I forced a laugh, my face burning, as her friends nodded politely. Robert didn't correct her, he just sipped his Molson and talked hockey with a neighbor. I was invisible again, like back in the Surrey duplex, but this time it hurt worse because I'd believed in them. I'd believed in us. That night, lying in my room, the maple leaf quilt no longer a comfort, I stared at the ceiling, my chest aching with a truth I couldn't yet name: this wasn't my home. I was Emily Chen, and the family I'd fought to belong to was already letting me go. The sting of being called a helper at that Point Grey barbecue still sears my chest, a wound that festers from the betrayal of those early Kitsilano days when I believed Robert and Margaret Taylor saw me as their own. By age 12, the warmth of maple syrup mornings and Robson Square skates was a distant echo, drowned out by the relentless cries of Ethan and Sophie, the twins who'd stolen my place. The house, once a 150 square meter haven, now felt like a cage, its walls closing in with every cold glance from Margaret. I was no longer Emily, the girl with the maple leaf quilt, but a shadow tasked with keeping the Taylor family's perfect life intact. The shift wasn't just neglect, it was erasure, deliberate and cruel, like being scraped off a Vancouver seawall mural. I was their maid, their errand runner, their invisible prop in a story that didn't include me. It started with small demands. "Emily, scrub the twins' sippy cups," Margaret would say, her voice clipped as she scrolled through preschool applications for Ethan and Sophie. I'd stand at the sink, 2 meters from her, scrubbing until my knuckles were raw, hoping for a nod of approval that never came. Robert, once my steady guide on the ice, now barked orders from the couch. "Emily, grab my coat from the dry cleaner. It's $5, use your bus money." I'd trek 3 kilometers to Granville Street, my $2.50 fare gone, my stomach growling as I passed food trucks I couldn't afford. I told myself I was helping, that this was what families did. But families don't label fridge shelves. Ethan's yogurt, Sophie's juice, every container marked, nothing for me. Once, I reached for a pudding cup after school, my hands still cold from the Kitsilano drizzle. "That's Sophie's," Margaret snapped, snatching it away like I'd stolen her wallet. "Check before you take." I stared, my throat a knot, and nodded. She didn't blink. The worst came at a parent-teacher night at my school, a 10-minute walk from our house. I'd aced a science project, building a model of the Capilano suspension bridge that won first place. I left it on the kitchen counter, hoping Margaret might notice. She didn't. Instead, she and Robert rushed out to enroll Ethan in a North Vancouver hockey league, leaving me to babysit Sophie. "You're good with her," Robert said, tossing me a $5 bill like I was a hired sitter. I sat on the floor, Sophie tugging my hair, while their laughter faded down the driveway. That night, my bridge model sat untouched, buried under a stack of Ethan's hockey schedules. I wanted to scream, to smash it, but I just shoved it under my bed, next to the sketchbook I hadn't touched since the twins arrived. The final knife twisted at a Kitsilano community fair, 4 kilometers from home. Margaret was showing off Ethan and Sophie, now chubby toddlers waddling through the crowd. A neighbor asked about me, trailing behind with a tray of lemonade for their booth. "Oh, Emily's our live-in help," Margaret said, her smile as polished as a BC Play spotlight. "She's great with the kids." Live-in help. The words burned, hotter than a summer day on Wreck Beach. I stood there, tray shaking, lemonade sloshing over my hands, as the neighbor nodded like it made perfect sense. Robert, manning the booth, didn't flinch, just handed out flyers for Sophie's daycare fundraiser. I wanted to throw the tray, to yell that I was their daughter, that the adoption papers were signed, sealed, locked in a drawer. But I didn't. I swallowed the rage, my chest tight as a Burrard Street traffic jam, and walked away, the crowd's chatter swallowing my existence. My 14th birthday was the breaking point. I came home from school, hoping for a card, a cupcake, anything. Instead, the house was decked out for Ethan's first hockey goal celebration. Balloons shaped like pucks floated over the living room, 10 square meters of chaos. Sophie was finger-painting a "Go Ethan" banner, Margaret beaming like she'd birthed a Stanley Cup champion. Robert was on the phone, bragging to his Navy buddy about Ethan's natural talent. I stood in the doorway, my backpack heavy with books and a stupid hope, waiting for someone to notice. No one did. "Hey, can you grab more pop from the garage?" Margaret called, not even looking up. I nodded, my eyes stinging, and trudged out. In the garage, I sat on a crate, the cold concrete biting through my jeans, and let one tear fall. Just one. I was Emily Chen, and I was done begging for a place in their world. The wound from that Kitsilano fair, where Margaret Taylor branded me "live-in help" in front of a lemonade-soaked crowd, cut deeper than any rejection at the Winter Light Festival. By 16, the Taylor house was no longer a home but a prison, its 150 square meter walls mocking the maple leaf quilt I'd once cherished. Ethan and Sophie's laughter filled the air, while my existence was reduced to scrubbing their dishes and dodging Margaret's cold glares. I was done begging for a seat at their table, done being the ghost in their perfect Vancouver family portrait. I needed out, not just from their Kitsilano cage but from the weight of their indifference. The Canadian Armed Forces wasn't a dream of glory, it was an escape hatch. I didn't want medals or parades, I wanted a place where my worth wasn't tied to someone else's love. So, one gray morning, I walked 5 kilometers to a recruiting office in downtown Vancouver, my heart pounding like a Stanley Park drum circle, and signed my name on a contract that felt like my first real choice. Basic training at CFB Esquimalt, 120 kilometers from Vancouver, was brutal, exactly as I needed it to be. The coastal wind whipped my face as I ran 10-kilometer drills, my boots sinking into the muddy fields of Vancouver Island. "Move it, Chen," my drill sergeant barked, his voice louder than a BC ferry horn. I didn't flinch. I pushed harder, outpacing recruits twice my size, my lungs burning but my resolve ironclad. This wasn't about proving myself to the Taylors, it was about proving I wasn't invisible. I aced rifle quals, my hands steady as I fired at targets 300 meters out, each shot a release of the rage I'd buried since Margaret snatched that pudding cup. My sergeant, a grizzled Newfoundlander, clapped my shoulder after a perfect score. "You're tougher than a North Shore granite slab, Chen," he said. It wasn't warmth, it was respect, something I'd never gotten from Robert's half-hearted, grab my coat orders. I told the Taylors about my enlistment over dinner, the first time I'd sat at their oak table in months. Margaret was spoon-feeding Sophie, Ethan was flicking peas across his plate, and Robert was glued to a Canucks game recap. "I'm joining the forces after graduation," I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. Robert didn't look up. "Sounds like a lot of yelling," he muttered, eyes on the TV. Margaret glanced at me, her lips tight. "What about Ethan's hockey camp? We'll need help with drop-offs." I stared, my fork frozen midair. They didn't ask why, didn't ask how I'd get to Esquimalt. They didn't care. I left the table, my plate untouched, and packed my bag in silence, the maple leaf quilt now a relic of a lie I'd once believed. At Esquimalt, I found something the tailors never gave me: purpose. I learned to fix radios under pressure, my fingers steady as I rewired circuits in the rain. I hauled 20-kilogram supply crates, my back aching but my mind clear. No one asked about my family, my past, or why I never got care packages. Performance was all that mattered. I met Lauren, a wiry corporal from Kelowna with a laugh like a foghorn and a habit of sharing her granola bars. "You look like you've seen some shit, Chin," she said one night, tossing me a bar during a late shift fixing a busted generator. I smirked, catching it. "Haven't we all?" She didn't pry, and I didn't offer, but her silence was the first kindness I'd trusted in years. We worked side by side, our boots caked in mud, singing off-key to old tragically hip songs to drown out the Pacific wind. One night, after a 12-kilometer night march, Lauren and I sat on a crate outside the barracks, the stars sharp over Esquimalt's coastline. "You got family waiting back home?" she asked, her voice low. I shook my head, the ache of Margaret's helper label still raw. "No one worth missing." She nodded, like she got it, and passed me her canteen. "Screw 'em. You've got us now." It wasn't a family, not in the Hallmark card way, but it was enough. For the first time, I wasn't chasing approval. I was building something: skills, strength, a name that meant something. At a graduation parade, my sergeant pinned a badge on my uniform, his gruff voice cutting through the crowd. "Not bad, Chin. You've got grit." I stood taller, my boots polished to a shine, the 5,000-kilometer distance from the tailor's indifference feeling like freedom. I was Emily Chin, and I was finally seen, not for who I wasn't, but for who I'd become. The scars from being erased as the tailors live and help, from surviving the cold indifference of their Kitsilano home, fueled every step I took in Esquimalt's muddy fields. By 27, I wasn't that 12-year-old girl scrubbing sippy cups or begging for a glance at their oak table. I'd built a life in the Canadian Armed Forces, earned respect from people like Lauren who saw me for my grit, not my past. But the memory of Robert Taylor's voice at the Winter Light Festival, calling me just someone we took in, still burned like a coal in my chest. I didn't want revenge, I wanted them to see the woman I'd become, to choke on the truth of who they'd discarded. So, when I was awarded a $5 million beachfront property in West Vancouver through a Veterans Foundation, I decided to give it to Robert. Not out of kindness, but to make him face the daughter he denied. I'd hand him the deed at his 60th birthday party in Whistler, 120 kilometers from Vancouver, and let him sit with the weight of his shame. I drove up the Sea-to-Sky Highway, the deed in a crisp leather folder on the passenger seat of my beat-up Honda, the Pacific Ocean glinting like a taunt. Whistler's Winter Festival was in full swing, fairy lights strung across Blackham Way, snow dusting the air like icing sugar. The Taylor's Chalet, a 200-square-meter cedar beauty, buzzed with guests, neighbors, Robert's Navy buddies, Margaret's book club friends sipping mulled wine. I parked a block away, my tailored black coat brushing my knees, my boots crunching on the 10-centimeter snowpack. My heart pounded, not with fear but with a rage I'd carried since that lemonade-soaked fair. I wasn't here to beg. I was here to stand tall. Clutching the folder, I crossed the snowy lawn, the crowd parting like the Red Sea, their whispers sharp as Whistler's wind. Inside, the chalet glowed with warmth I'd never felt in their home. Ethan, now a cocky 20-year-old in a Canucks jersey, was laughing with a girlfriend by a roaring fireplace. Sophie, her hair in a sleek ponytail, poured hot cider, her laugh echoing like a bell. Margaret, in a red sweater, arranged a tray of Nanaimo bars, her smile as polished as ever. Robert stood near a cedar bar, his silver hair catching the light, talking hockey with a Navy friend. I stepped forward, the folder heavy in my hands. "Happy birthday, Robert," I said, my voice cutting through the chatter like a skate on ice. Heads turned. His eyes met mine, narrowing, then flickering with something, recognition, maybe guilt. "Emily," he said, his tone low, like he'd seen a ghost. I held out the folder, my hand steady despite the fire in my chest. A gift, I said, loud enough for the room to hear. A $5 million beachfront home in West Vancouver. Clean title, no strings. It's yours. The crowd froze, glasses clinking to a stop, the air thick as a Squamish fog. Margaret stepped forward, her smile gone, her eyes darting to Robert. "What's this about, Emily?" she asked, her voice tight, like she was scolding a child. Ethan snorted, crossing his arms. "What, some army stunt to make us feel bad?" Sophie smirked, muttering, "She's joking, right?" I didn't flinch. I locked eyes with Robert, the man who'd once steadied my skates but now saw me as nothing. "Take it," I said, shoving the folder closer. He reached for it, his hand trembling, then stopped. "Emily, we don't need this," he started, his voice loud now, addressing the crowd more than me. "You've done well, but you're not part of this family. You never were." The words hit like a slap, sharper than the Whistler cold, echoing that "not my daughter" from that festival night. The crowd gasped, a woman dropping her cider glass, the shatter loud in the silence. My chest burned, the pain raw, but I didn't break. I opened the folder, pulled out the deed, and held it high. "You're right, Robert," I said, my voice steel. "I'm not your daughter. I'm better." Then I tore it, once, twice, 3 times, each rip a scream I'd held since I was 9. The paper fell like Whistler snow, scattering across the polished floor. Margaret's face paled, her hands clutching her sweater. Ethan's jaw dropped, his girlfriend staring wide-eyed. Sophie whispered, "She's crazy," but her voice shook. Robert stepped forward, his mouth open, but I was already turning. The crowd parted again, their faces a blur of shock and pity. I walked out, my boots steady, the cold air hitting my face like a release. I didn't look back, not at the chalet, not at the life I'd once begged to be part of. I was Emily Chen, and I'd just burned their last chance to claim me. The moment I tore that $5 million deed into snow like scraps at Robert Taylor's Whistler birthday, leaving the chalet's warmth and the Taylors' stunned faces behind, something shifted. The rage that had fueled me since that lemonade-soaked fair, since Margaret's "live and help" label, didn't vanish. It settled, like the Pacific tide after a storm. Driving back down the Sea-to-Sky Highway, the 120-kilometer stretch from Whistler to Vancouver felt like a cleansing, each curve washing away the girl who'd begged for a place in their Kitsilano home. My hands didn't shake on the wheel. My chest didn't ache. For the first time, the air in my lungs was mine, not borrowed from a family that never wanted me. I wasn't running from their rejection anymore, I was building something new, something real, in the city I'd always called home. Back in Vancouver, I settled into a modest 80-square-meter apartment in East Vancouver, a world away from the Taylor Cedar Chalet. It wasn't much, a creaky floor, a view of a graffiti-splashed alley, a $20 thrift store couch, but it was mine. No one could take it away. I'd left the forces after a decade, my medals tucked in a drawer, not for show but as proof I'd survived. I took a job with a nonprofit, Bright Horizons, helping kids like the one I'd been, orphans, foster youth, kids who felt invisible in places like Surrey or Burnaby. One of them was Ava, a 12-year-old with eyes sharp as a house-sound hawk, dreaming of flying planes. "Think I could be a pilot?" she asked one day, sketching a CF-18 Hornet on a napkin at our community center, 2 kilometers from my apartment. "You don't just think it," I told her, handing her a $10 aviation magazine I'd bought at a Gastown bookstore. "You make it happen." Her smile, small but fierce, hit me harder than any sergeant's praise at Esquimalt. Work became my anchor. I spent days mentoring teens, helping them apply for scholarships, teaching them to fix bikes or write resumes in a cramped office smelling of coffee and hope. One evening, as I locked up, Ava ran up, clutching a dog-eared library book about the snowbirds. "Look, Emily, they fly in formation," she said, her voice bright as Granville Island's market lights. I nodded, my throat tight, remembering my own sketches of the Lions Gate Bridge, ignored under Ethan's hockey schedules. "Keep reading, Ava," I said. "You're already halfway there." Moments like that, small and uncelebrated, filled the holes the Taylors left. I wasn't their daughter, but I was someone's mentor, someone's proof that you could rise above being just someone taken in. Lauren, my old corporal friend from Kelowna, called one night, her foghorn laugh crackling through my phone. "So, you're a big shot do-gooder now, Chin," she teased, probably chewing her eternal granola bar. I laughed, the sound freer than it had been in years. "Just trying to keep kids off the streets, not like you, slacking in Esquimalt." She snorted. "Send me a postcard from that fancy East Van penthouse." I glanced at my thrift store couch, the paint peeling off my apartment's walls. "Yeah, real fancy," I said, but I mailed her a $5 Tim Hortons gift card anyway, scribbling, "For your terrible coffee habit." Her reply came a week later, a postcard of a BC ferry, with "Proud of you, loser," scrawled on the back. It went on my fridge, the only thing pinned there. Some nights, the pain crept back, not as rage but as a quiet ache, like a bruise you forget until you press it. I'd wake at 3 a.m., the East Vancouver rain tapping my window, dreaming of Margaret's cold, "Put him down, Emily," or Robert's, "You're not part of this family." But those moments passed. I'd make tea, Earl Grey like Margaret's but without the bitterness, and sit on my balcony, the city's hum louder than my doubts. Healing wasn't a fireworks show. It was this, quiet mornings, a kid's smile, a life I'd built without needing their approval. I was Emily Chin, and I'd found my place, not in their world, but in one I'd carved out, 4,000 kilometers from the girl who cried in their garage. Walking away from the Taylors' Whistler chalet, leaving those torn deed scraps scattered like snow, felt like shedding a skin I'd outgrown. The 120-kilometer drive back to Vancouver along the sea-to-sky highway was quiet, the Pacific's hum a steady pulse against the ache of Robert's final rejection. "You're not part of this family." That pain, carved deep from my days as their "live and help," didn't break me anymore. It had forged me, like steel in an Esquimalt furnace, into someone who didn't need their approval to stand tall. In East Vancouver, my 80-square-meter apartment became more than a shelter. It was a testament to a life I'd built without the Taylors' name. Mentoring kids like Ava at Bright Horizons, watching her sketch CF-18 Hornets with a fire I recognized, showed me family isn't blood. It's the people who see you, who stay, like Lauren's foghorn laugh or Ava's napkin drawings pinned to my fridge beside her $10 aviation magazine. I learned healing isn't a loud victory, not a Stanley Cup parade or a Granville Island spotlight. It's quieter, like the 5 a.m. rain tapping my balcony, washing away the ghost of the girl who cried in a Kitsilano garage. It's waking up without the weight of Margaret's "Put him down, Emily," or Ethan's hockey balloons overshadowing my 14th birthday. It's choosing to pour my strength into others, like helping Ava chase her pilot dreams or teaching a teen to fix a bike in our community center, 2 kilometers from my home. I used to think I needed the Taylors to define me, to give me a place. But I was wrong. You don't need a family's name to be whole. You build your own, brick by brick, with people who don't ask you to beg for a seat at their table. If you've ever felt invisible, like I did in that Surrey foster home or under the Taylors' cold stares, know this: your worth isn't tied to those who turn away. It's in the steps you take, the hands you lift, the life you carve out despite the scars. Find your Ava, your Lauren, the ones who see your grit, not your ghosts. Start small, a $5 coffee shared with a friend, a 10-minute walk along English Bay to clear your head. Build something that's yours, whether it's a dream, a skill, or a single moment where you feel alive. That's the lesson I carry, not from the Taylors' rejection, but from the life I made after. I'm Emily Chin, and my story isn't about their failure, it's about my strength. If this story hit you, if it stirred something deep, please drop a comment below. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, someone fighting to be seen. And if you want more stories of survival, of finding courage in the quiet moments, hit that subscribe button for True North Courage. We're here every week, telling truths that cut like a North Shore wind but heal like a Vancouver dawn. Thank you for listening.